Yes, we can go ahead and get started. Is everyone ready to get started? Okay, great. All right, so we are here from UNC Charlotte. A little bit about you, actually we'll introduce ourselves first. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Amanda Binder. I'm a social sciences and history librarian.
I'm Liz Seiler. I'm a collection development librarian.
And I'm Lindsay Sprague. I'm the user experience librarian.
So just a little bit about our library. We are, UNC Charlotte is part of the UNC system. We are the third largest university in the system. We have 27,000 FTE. And we are a STEM-focused university, although we do have, obviously, humanities, social science, all sorts of programs that we do heavily lean STEM. This presentation is about the fact that we are out of space, which I'm sure is common at lots of libraries now. We have been out of space since 2012, and there are a lot of factors around that. One is that we were trying to get to the most books we could, because that was supposed to show value. But unfortunately, our building isn't getting any bigger. So we've actually never needed our collection significantly. We accepted a significant number of gifts from various places and just added them to our shelves. And and we continue to collect print books as needed. So because of that, we are very much filled to the brim. In addition to that, our collection is separated because at one point they decided to put in a compact shelving and move all of the low-use titles into that compact shelving. The idea was that was supposed to be restricted access, but it didn't turn out that way. It's still open. So half of our collection is upstairs and half our collection is downstairs. And plus anything new that we get goes on an overflow shelf. So basically our collection is not browsable in any way and has been overflowing for a while. In addition to that, our student size has increased significantly over the past 15 years to the point, like I said, we're at 27,000 FTE and 30,000 head count. And so we can only house 6% of our students in the library at any given time, which is really not enough. Our students use our library extensively, and they don't have enough space to do their studying. And so in addition to the fact that we don't have room for new books, we don't have new room for any more students. So because of all of these factors, we needed to start exploring the option of offsite storage. And we've been actually doing this for the last 4 years, but because we don't have any funding to move at this point, it's sort of just been a pie in the sky situation. But we've been still trying to prepare our faculty for it because the hope is it will come eventually. And the last thing that we want is to have an op-ed written in the newspaper saying that we are getting rid of all the books. So we're trying to do as much outreach as we can. And we had a building study recently which basically said in order to provide the student space that should be required for the size of our university, we would need to move 80% of the collection out of the building. And that includes serials in addition to our monograph collection. So that's a lot, and that's a big shock to the campus. So that's what we've been trying to do. And so we've been trying to alert the faculty, obviously, to mixed reviews depending on which department you visit. And that's something that Amanda is going to talk about right now.
First, just a bit of background in terms of, Liz already told you a little bit about how we got to the point where we're at right now. But I'm going to start off with sharing some of the things that we tried to do in thinking about different options that might work for our university. So this was kind of started, the literature review started this past summer. We have a summer fellowship program for MLA students, and we hired one of those fellows to work on conducting a literature review of what other universities have done. And then we also, she also created a survey that we could send to different folks that work with collections. And initially the survey, we wanted to see what peer institutions were doing, but I think what we're finding in terms of responses to the survey was that maybe peer institutions of our size were not necessarily or did not necessarily have offsite storage facilities. And that doesn't mean that they don't need them, but we weren't getting those kinds of responses. So the survey itself kind of confirmed some of the things that we already knew, but it was still helpful to send it out. And if any of you responded to it, we appreciate it. But the literature review also kind of confirmed some of the things that we already thought we knew, but it's still always good to look at the literature. So we learned a lot about how different universities and university libraries have approached doing offsite storage and what their process is. But as you can imagine, a lot of what libraries do in terms of deciding what goes offsite and what their situation is just very much based on their own institution, their circumstances, and so it's really hard sometimes to apply some of that literature to what you actually need to do for your own institution. We did get a lot of inspiration from the Arizona State University's white paper, the future of the academic library print collection, because even if 80% of the collection is offsite, that still leaves 20% to stay in the building. And there's a lot of important findings or ideas that come out of this white paper, including ideas about print literacy and also how to kind of curate print collections that stay in your library and kind of help them stay visible even if they're not physically in your building anymore. So we really were hoping to see if any other universities have maybe kind of started to implement some of these ideas. And I know that ASU did actually put out a follow-up to this. So this was kind of a model for us, not that necessarily that they had implemented everything, but we really liked the ideas that came out of this white paper. So those are some of the ideas that we had going into this. But like I said, because the literature review and a lot of what libraries have done are very specific to their institution, we realized that we kind of had to just study ourselves and look within for some of the ideas and solutions that would work for our library in this case. So we definitely wanted to incorporate faculty outreach and talking to faculty, as Liz had mentioned. So at my institution, I am one of the subject librarians, or a library liaison is another way to describe us. And I work with the history department, but I also work with political science. But definitely history, as you can imagine, had a lot of feelings about this idea. And because I've been working with history faculty now for about 7 years at my current institution, I know the ways in which faculty work with print collections, and I also know the ways that they teach with print collections. And so I knew that going into these discussions, it was really important that we were listening and making sure that if we were going to go into a department meeting to have a conversation with faculty, that we were not going to just kind of go in and be like, you know, prints over and we don't have space and just get over it, because that's not really an effective method for working with faculty in terms of these types of conversations. So because I do work with faculty, I do know that obviously if you talk with faculty or you've read up about this, that you know there's this issue with browsing or different research methods that faculty use and different ways that they teach working with print collections. So I think it's really important when you're approaching to work with faculty that are heavily invested in print collections, that you really get a sense of how they use collections. This is not something that they just made up. This is a way, an approach to doing research, a research methodology in which they use print collections. So it's important to accept that as a valid method and to listen to faculty and really hear their concerns. There was a meeting in which I just had with the faculty, because I regularly meet with faculty, go to their department meetings, but then there was a separate meeting which Liz and the library dean came in, and they would go into any department that was willing to talk and hear about what was going on in the library. And part of listening to faculty is also representing their concerns in any kind of other library discussions that are happening. So as soon as we started talking about offsite storage in the library, I know that I wanted to be part of those conversations. Some faculty or some librarians maybe thought, I know my faculty don't really care about where the print collections are housed. But I knew that faculty that I worked with would care about it. And I also knew that sometimes library administrators and university administrators don't necessarily understand how faculty in different disciplines work with print collections. So I wanted to make sure that their voices were heard and represented in these conversations. So like I said, we did go to department meetings. And at those department meetings, Liz had the opportunity to explain some of the constraints that the library was experiencing with our space and with our print collections. And she had some visuals, so it was good for them to be able to see you know, what the reality of our library is in terms of what we have available for space, and what were some of the other things that we needed to address as a library, including space for students to study. I think it's really important when you're talking with faculty about print collections and maybe possibly moving materials off-site is just to be honest with the situation, and be willing to accept that maybe they may not be happy with what the library has planned, and you have to be okay with that. You can try to have a positive spin on everything that the library is doing, and you may feel positive, or some folks in the library or the administration may feel positive about moving materials off-site, but you can't, force that idea upon faculty, especially if it's going to require a change in how they may approach doing research or even teaching how to do research to their students. So it's important to kind of give them time to sit with these ideas, and be willing to, even come back to another meeting and talk with them in different ways. One of the things that resulted from us talking with the history faculty is they wanted to write a memo to the administration to talk about their concerns and what they thought was important. So for example, they really wanted any kind of off-site to actually happen on campus. They thought it was very important for materials to be on campus. If they weren't in the library, then maybe building some other building or reusing some other building. And we did explain that those ideas had come up and the administration seemed kind of more set on having it off campus. But again, it's up to the faculty to be able to express themselves and make those points, and it's important for them to be heard. So they did write a memo, and actually resulted in there being a committee that was formed that Liz manages, and I serve on that as well. And she'll tell you about that in a little bit. But another way to think about working with faculty as you're considering these moves to moving materials off-site is just engaging them in the process, even beyond just having conversations with them. So, even though we're, as Liz said, we already have restraints in terms of like what we can currently house, and this has been going on for a while. So we've been looking at lists, just as many libraries are, of like maybe duplicates that you want to review, or which periodicals do you need. So we've been doing massive reviews of really the entire library collection, which has been very time intensive. But some departments are fine with the library making decisions for them, and others are not. So allowing faculty to be engaged in that process, if they're interested and want to take the time to look at lists of materials or review them, is really important as well. And we did allow them to be part of that process. Then there were some other formal opportunities, like Liz is going to tell you about that committee. And then one of the things that we talked about in our meeting with the faculty was just kind of helping them imagine the future of the library. So let's say their memo doesn't work and we're not able to get on-site storage, and 80% of the collection goes off-site. We really don't know exactly what will happen. But one of the things we want to do is just kind of help them see what would be available. Like browsing, physically browsing is not available. And so at the time we were having these discussions, we did switch systems. So we switched to Alma Primo, and within the system, they have a virtual browse feature. And initially we didn't turn this on because ebook records don't have the LC classification assigned to them, and so we thought that this didn't actually represent all of our holdings because it only showed print holdings. But then when we realized we'd be having discussions with faculty, and actually it's helpful that it shows the physical materials, if many of them would be housed off-site. So we actually turned on this feature, we talked about it with them, and then the librarians have been teaching this feature in the catalog when we're doing library instruction. So it's kind of getting faculty as well as students used to some of the tools that will be available to them, even if we had to move materials or a large percent off-site. So now Liz is going to talk about some of the more formal ways in which we work with faculty.
Right, so that memo that the history department wrote was meant to go to the faculty council for them to vote and approve on, in which case they then thought the administration would then do those things. Fortunately, the provost was not necessarily on board with that. So what happened instead is we created a faculty council collection review task force, and what this group will be, the membership of the group is basically faculty from all over campus. So it's not just the humanities faculty that are very invested in the print collection, but we've also got someone from engineering, someone from business who has been very clear that he doesn't seem to care all that much. We've got someone from education, philosophy. So we've got people from all different areas, so we get different perspectives and not just the hardcore print champions. And the goal of the group is to include the faculty in the process of coming up with a plan for when the remote storage is available, and that we have that buy-in from the faculty beforehand. And the outcome that we hope to have by the end of this year is a report to give to the faculty council with different models based on how much space we're going to get or how much we're asked to remove from the building into remote storage. So it could be, we have a tower, and that's where a lot of the general collection, print collection is. They could say, can you just clear the tower? Obviously, we wouldn't just take the books out of the tower. We would figure out what books we want to keep and what books we didn't. So that would be 30% of the collection is basically what I'm saying. So we want to come up with models of different percentages of the collection using different parts of the collection to determine what we might move out of the building. And then we would present to the council, and it's more of like recommendations, not hard and fast that that's what we're going to do, but more recommendations so that they can approve it. So then again, this is just another outreach opportunity to let them know this is what we're doing. Be prepared when it happens. Don't be surprised. And a lot of the faculty don't come to the library anymore. They really don't. So we don't want them to come into the library and be like, oh, the books are gone. We told you. We told you lots of times. And this is just one of the other times that we're telling you. So anyway, one of the first things that we had to do in this group, because we convened at the beginning of this semester, was to start getting the faculty, and there are also students on this, a couple students as well, out of the mind, getting them to the mindset of what we could do with that space if the books weren't there, what we could do in that space with students and such. So that is what Lindsay's going to talk about in the user experience study that we did.
Yes, so we basically are in the process of doing a few different studies. So I sit in the assessment department, so that is kind of where my interests are. But these are basically the guiding questions for the studies that we're doing. So we're really interested in what do users value about the library? What is their conception of what the library does? What do they use it for? So that we're not taking anything away that is really critical to their actual use of the library. We're also really interested in what are their concerns about moving 80% of collections off-site, if that's the percentage that we do go with. And then I'll talk most about this question, but how do our users imagine and design an ideal study space? So once the books move to the off-site storage, what happens with that space? Like, what's the ideal use for students? So you can go to the next one. Basically, just in general, when we're working with users and redesigning a new service or a space, rule number one is don't ask people what they want. Find out what they're actually doing and then design for that behavior. And there's a few reasons for that. One of them is that a lot of times people will tell you like what they think that you want to hear when you ask what they want. Another one is that a lot of times people will just tell you what they want, that they want more of what you already have. So like if there's a student that really values the library for quiet study space, they'll say that they want more quiet study space in the library. So asking people what they want is a good way to get a sense of what they value and like, but not necessarily the best way to design a new space if you're thinking about it that way. And then another reason why it's helpful to find out what people are actually doing rather than asking what they want is because a lot of times you'll just get these like wacky, outlandish answers that are fun and creative but aren't really that practical. So you'll see some of that later in the presentation. So even though we know that, and that's rule number one, we basically just asked people what they wanted. So again, one does not simply follow established best practices. And we learned a lot from actually just asking people what they wanted, even though it didn't answer the initial questions that we had. So this is one of the things that we've been doing. So we've been doing these kind of participatory design workshops with different groups on campus. So we have a student library advisory board, which is made up of undergrad students who are members of student government, the Faculty Advisory Library Committee, so faculty on campus, the Board of Advisors, our community members who kind of guide the library, library faculty and staff, and then the collection review task force that Liz just talked about. So we did this activity, oh, wait, one second.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
So basically what we did with each of these groups is we gave them a blueprint of the tower floor without any stacks. So it was just a blank blueprint with like where the windows are, where the bathrooms are. And we cut out just thousands of tiny pieces of furniture and gave them markers, and we asked them to design their ideal study space for students. Yes. So what did we learn? This was a blueprint from some of our colleagues at the library. I zoomed in on some of them. They want bidets in like a really swanky faculty lounge, and a water feature, which is not a bidet. So,
Next.
yes. And then again, so students, we saw that they tended to want more of what they already liked about the library. So comfy chairs in front of the windows, and those are some of like our most used seats are like we have these little kind of like private desks that are facing the windows. So more of those, and then more of these like little individual study pods. So in that way. So basically, in a practical sense, it didn't really tell us how we should design the floor, but it was valuable in a few other ways. So I think one of the most important things was that it got people thinking about the space in the library as being flexible and not just being for books. So handing them a blueprint and saying, what would you do with this space in the absence of books on this floor? And Liz pointed out that no one created a floor that was just books. So everyone created some kind of like flexible study space. So it got people thinking about what the library could be if we moved books off-site. So it was kind of like getting them involved in starting to think about what that transition would look like. So it was useful in that way to kind of get the discussion started and start building buy-in with faculty or anyone that was kind of maybe resistant to the idea. And then one other thing that we did as part of one of these activities, so we asked people, what are the 3 best things about the library? And that's a really basic question, but it tells us a lot about kind of like what people think about first, like what do they associate with the library?
There you go.
Yeah. So here are some of the responses. So faculty said, access to journals, databases, special collections, seating. Students really valued study space, laptops, study rooms. The most interesting thing about this is that they're like students and faculty, no one mentioned print collections. And that doesn't mean that they don't value them, but it's not the very first thing that came to their mind when they think about how they use the library. So that was really interesting, I think.
Absolutely. Okay, so now we did this one that was the first thing we did when we met with the faculty council review task force. The first thing I did is I took them up to one of the floors and showed them what it looked like. And I think, because like I said, a lot of them weren't coming into the library anymore. And it was just, they were like, they had no idea how full the shelves were. A couple other things, the floors are not ADA compliant because the shelves are too close together. Our elevators are not ADA compliant, so no one could really use those if they had any sort of disability. There was barely any sitting space up there. The shelves were so high that they brought up the point that maybe some people in the evenings might feel uncomfortable being up there by themselves because there's not a lot of space. You can't see around you or the people around you. And when it got dark, it might have not been a comfortable place for people to study, or students to study anyway. So we did that, and we did the user experience study, and it really got them into the headspace, especially the ones that came in being a little bit abstinent about the idea at all. Got them into the headspace of, okay, we are going to need to do this. Now let's start talking about what we're going to do. Another thing that I did to get them into that headspace was give them a few facts about how much fewer print is being used in the library, how many pieces are being picked up. You know, in the 90s, it was like 60,000 a year, and then it was like 8,000. So like different things that were happening in the library with the print collection, and the decrease in the usage overall, you know, has gone down as well. So giving them those sort of numbers. So then what I did is I worked with our head of assessment, and she created this Tableau dashboard with all of our collection information in it. And I mean, we've moved ILSs 3 times in the last 7 years. So someone just gave me a very shocked look. Yes, we did. Yes. So our data is as good as we're going to get at this point. I think our usage data is, our circulation data carried on from, we have it back to 1999 because we switched then and things got a little messed up at that point. But we have several years of usage data. But in terms of like the way things are cataloged in the system came out a little bit weird. So that's why you're seeing like dry erase marker kit. We're not sure why that got in there. The other thing to take into account here is the issues are actually theses and dissertations. So like we look at this and say, those theses and dissertations, print ones, those can definitely go off campus. There's no reason for us to keep them because we also have a copy in special collections. So that's 43,000 pieces that right there off the top that could go out of the building. But the point of the Tableau dashboard is that we can actually do some filtering of the collection based on usage, based on LC class, so that you can we can start doing models. Oh, sorry, I'm not there yet. I don't have my final thoughts. This is supposed to link out, but I don't know yet. So this is the actual live dashboard. And so like if you wanted to put in format being physical book, that will just pull up the number of physical books. And then you wanted to do, say we wanted to look at the 5th floor. So on the 5th floor there are 76,000 books. And we wanted to check out the number of checkouts, how many books on the floor that have been used 0 to 1 time. We could say, you know, if we were doing it by usage, you know, 34,000 of those books could conceivably go off campus. So this is kind of a way to make the models. But we also could do it by classification. So if we're thinking history titles more likely should stay on campus because they need to be browsable and they're more likely to be used when they're on the shelves and maybe not checked out or things like that. We could do it that way as well. So we could say physical books. Oh, I forgot that it carries over. So if you did it on this one, it carries over to this one. So we would have to clear it out. Can I do that? Is it clear it out? Yep. So you could clear it out. So if you wanted to say LC class, sorry. I'm the worst. Okay. You could see all of the history books that we have. And so if they wanted to keep all of the books in that particular area, we'd say, well, that's 30,000 books. Do we need to keep all of those 30,000 books in the library? So this is just a tool that we're going to use to help create different models for different percentages of the collection that might need to stay in the building compared to things that might need to stay out of the building. So we could use this, so if we said, okay, we want to keep history in the building, this is how much we would keep in the building, and this is, you know, where it could go in the building. So that's kind of how this works. We haven't created any models with it yet, but we hope to do so very soon because that's what's going to be going into our recommendations that will be approved by the faculty council. Other things that we are going to be considering are what departments are more likely to request books to be delivered to their office as opposed to books that they come and take out right off the shelves. Because in that situation, if a department is only asking for their books to be direct to them, then the offsite storage shouldn't make any difference. They're not going to know the difference, right? So that's something to take into account. Taking into account the areas that are not heavily using the books. Like I said, the business faculty member that's on the committee was like, we don't care, you can move the books wherever you want. So we've definitely got some of that feedback as well. And then thinking about the books that we started recording in-house use. We weren't doing that because every time we changed systems, it made it harder to do for some reason. But we figured out how to do it with Alma, so we're doing it now. And so we're going to check and see what the in-house use of things, because if a certain area seems to be used more in-house, then maybe that specific subject area needs to stay in the building. And then finally, thinking about when we're thinking about things that are going to go to remote storage, thinking about how that affects interlibrary loan, checking to see if because use in circulation use in the system is ILLs are counted that way. So if we look at something and it looks like that's actually being ILL'd instead of being used by our users, that can be taken off campus. So just different factors that we have to take into account when we're making these models, but we're going to be using all that information plus our tool here to help us with that and make sure we're making all of the right decisions for everyone and making the collection as usable as possible, because even now it's not particularly usable if you're thinking about browsing. So so just some final thoughts is our ultimate goal is to make our space and collection more usable for our students, and at the same time making sure the library's print collection is serving the faculty needs. We're not getting a new building. We've asked, they said no. So we need to work within the confines of the building we have and take advantage of the technology that we have, like the virtual browse, to take the place of the traditional browsing the shelves. And we're hoping all of this work will help prepare the faculty and the students for the hopefully inevitable plan to move to offsite storage, and so everyone is prepared and content with the plans that we make. And that is the hope that this work will take us to. And then we'll have this beautiful floor, which will have collections on it, just not as many, and lots of steady space for the students.
I just want to add too that, and the other thoughts for how to use the spaces that will remain where books might not be could also, it wouldn't necessarily just be based on the numbers. So there have been other ideas proposed, like there could be a theme to a collection. It could be related to the area in which we live, and it could tie in digital exhibits relating to our special collection. So there's other ways in which those existing spaces can still have books and be organized, or that could be another way in which we help make decisions about which materials to keep on site.
That's it. Yes, question, wow, okay.
Do you know what the turnaround time will be from to retrieve a book from the offsite storage?
So the research we did, pretty much every library said 24 hours, so that would be our goal. And right now, for like document delivery or book delivery to offices, it's actually much worse. And part of that is because we've been sending it through campus mail, and it's not campus mail is not good. So we're going to start a program soon where we're going to hire students who will be delivering the books to the faculty. But the idea is it would be, for students, it would be 24-hour turnaround to the library.
Yes.
So, are you guys building a site or are you renting?
That is up in the air. We have been advocating to build a site. Unfortunately, I'm not sure the money is there, so I think they're leaning more towards off-campus renting, which is concerning, but not really our decision. So, but we're advocating for something to be built. We're getting a new chancellor soon. Our chancellor is retiring at the end of this academic year, and they're trying to do a quick search for a new chancellor. So a lot of that will be dependent on their support of this project. And I think, we've been doing a lot of work on, advocating for it. And there are people in the provost office that are advocating for it. So hopefully we'll get what we want, but it's uncertain at this point.
I have one more. I see you using tabloid. Have you thought about OCLC green glass?
So we have access to Green Glass. We are part of a shared print retention program with our state. And we have access to Green Glass, but we've not been able to use it yet for our institution because we've been using it as a consortium. So we will be able to use that going forward. I just didn't, for this purposes, because the Tableau dashboard can be used by all the faculty. I didn't know that if it was worth training them on Green Glass, but we will be using Green Glass. So we've agreed to retain 74,000 titles as part of our print retention program. But the Green Glass will actually be used by our liaisons to start identifying titles that we could actually read from the collection. So that will be happening in tandem. Like Amanda said, we've already been working on that, but we've been sort of focusing on the low-hanging fruit. But I think there's also some other things we could look at in terms of slimming down our collections. That's the other thing too, is we would really like all of that to be done before any actual move to offsite storage, because that's then double work, really.
I have a question. It's less about the collection development or management really, but have combos about disability inclusion within the space come up, or how is inclusivity or universal design being considered as you guys are designing physical new space?
I can take that, yeah. Yeah, that's been a critical part of it. So one of the things that in the building study that they did was like one of the pieces of that was to renovate the tower so that the elevators are ADA accessible.
Okay.
And that's the piece of the plan that our campus has been like, yes, we need to do that. So that seems like it is possible for the future, but like any time that we get to redesign the space, like if the money comes in and we do get to redesign the tower floor, ADA accessibility is critical for that.
Right, and one thing to think about that I'd like to mention is that right now, because of the way the floors are, and I mentioned like the shelves and everything, if they were to redo the elevators to make them ADA compliant, we could not keep the books in there the way they are, right? We couldn't get them up in the elevator and then, not be able to use the shelves. So the floors would have to be redesigned anyway. The books would have to be removed mostly anyway. So that's something that, we've been talking to the faculty about as well. Is like, as much as you'd like this to stay here, it's not really, we can't keep it that way, so.
When you're done and you have all this space, will it all become student space, or are there other units on campus who are eyeing your space to move in?
I'm sure they're eyeing
They've
it.
already taken some of our
Yeah,
other
half
spaces,
a good portion of the library is actually career center. And they have taken other, I don't think that will happen because we are already so deficient in space anyway, that I don't see that happening. But that's why we want these plans. That's what we want, like a set plan of what we're gonna do, so they can't say, well, you don't know what you're gonna do with that floor yet? Well, why don't we move in this there for, an indefinite amount of time? So, yeah. We have one classroom that they're using and I think it annoys everybody. So.
Yeah, that was one of my questions. But the other one is so you've run into this idea where like more is better, let's collect it all kind of thing. But now you're like, whoa, wait, hold on, you're not going to give us more space or more money to build more space. So are you as a library kind of pushing back on that collection policy, right? Or
Right, in terms of collecting
what's
print,
the tension there? Yeah.
print materials, yeah. We have reduced the amount of print materials that we purchase somewhat organically because of ebooks, but also we, as a lot of libraries have experienced, we also have budget issues. So that's also contributed to us buying less print materials. We've reduced the amount of approval that we're getting significantly, so we're not getting a lot of direct ship stuff. So, there is a push and pull, but I think that's actually been more based on the budget piece of it than the space. I will say with the weeding that we've done, with the multiple copies and things like that, it's basically just been a replacement for the new stuff. So we weeded 8,000 titles and we bought 8,000 titles. So that didn't really work out in making extra space, but at least it made space for the new stuff. So, but we also do make it clear to the faculty that we're not done collecting books, print books. Print books are still out there, we're still buying them, we will continue to buy them, So that's why it's also important to get that remote storage, because at some point we may not have anywhere to put the print books, so.
Have you looked at doing this by time, like keeping in the library the most current 20 years or 30 years to see what those numbers break out? Because even in history, they want to see the most current theories on what happened.
So this does have a publication date on it, so we could do it that way. And I think there is some thought to that. We do have, obviously we have our new bookshelf. There were a lot of things that are not included on here because we didn't think it was relevant to consider moving to an offsite storage. Obviously, new books wouldn't be moved to an offsite storage. We have a popular reading collection that wouldn't be moved. Right now, we can't move our government documents because they're not all cataloged, so no one, if we moved it to offsite storage, no one would know, what was there.
But they don't know now either.
Well,
so.
Yeah, we're trying, we're working on that. We probably we can't move our maps, those aren't really cataloged.
Yeah,
We have some specialized collections that were donated to us that we can't legally move off site because of the rules of donations, but yes.
Yeah, that was another question I had. I'm at University of Iowa, we're doing exactly the same thing. Our survey just went out to faculty today as we're talking about space. But what about special collections?
So special collections currently resides on the 10th floor of our building. The idea is that they're supposed to move down to the ground floor where the compact shelving is. Academic Affairs have said that they are not going to get a location that's temperature controlled. So special collections materials would not be able to go to the remote storage facility. So that does have to stay on campus, and that does create a bit of a wrinkle for us in terms of, if that all has to stay on campus, does that mean even more print? But my understanding is based on the study we did with the building study, 80% should be sufficient. I don't think we plan to move all of it, but no, the special collection stuff cannot go offsite at this point because they're not going to create a temperature controlled building.
And your and your 10th floor is temperature controlled now?
Yes, yeah, it is. And we also have the 9th floor is where they keep a lot of stuff that's not for view. And that's temperature controlled as well. Yep.
Okay, thanks.
So we do have our contact information up here, so if you do have any questions or you're working on projects like these at your own libraries, we're happy to talk with any of you. I think the more that libraries talk with each other about this process, the more we can help each other as much as possible coming up with ideas.
And if you're interested in the eventual models we do come up with using the Tableau dashboard, I'm happy to share that. There'll be a paper.
How did you get your data into Tableau?
I don't know how she did it. Our assessment librarian or head assessment did that. If you want to know, I'm sure
She's
she'd
a
be.
genius, I'll tell you.
She is very, very good at Tableau. Yeah, so if you want to know, I'm sure she would be happy to talk to anyone about it.
Yeah, Tableau, but we don't have
If you have anyone in your library, no, you can't have her if that's what you're asking.
Just for a while.
All right.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.